I'm trying to figure out how to explain how to tackle this uneven bevel situation. See, when we talk about uneven bevels and we talk about sharpening them, there's 90-10 and 80-20 and 70-30, 60-40. All these ratios are thrown out there, and my understanding from the way the experts have shared with forums and on YouTube and in videos, those percentages, those ratios, is you sharpen the higher number with that amount of time and effort as compared to the other side of the knife with the lower ratio number. In other words, this is a right-handed 70-30 knife. That would mean on the 70 side, ratio side, which is the outside, I sharpen 70% of my effort on that side of the bevel, and the 30 side, which is the inside, in a right-handed knife, the flatter ground inside gets 30% of my sharpening effort. That's how I understand from what it's been taught to me and what I've taken out of all the videos that I've seen talking about sharpening those knives. A 90-10 would be 90% of the effort on that one side and just 10% of the effort. That, to me, describes a single-sided knife. This is a Deba. It's a single-sided knife. All the grind is on one side. This is a right-handed. All the grind is on the right outside and negligible on the inside. Hence, 90-10 would be the ratio that would describe it, or single-sided. The reason I say 10 is because you do put somewhat of a little burr on a flat-sided knife, deburring the sharpening from the beveled side. So 90-10 to me is an explanation I can understand. That explanation is shared by this Sushin Inox, which is right-handed knife, 90-10. This side is essentially flat. It has a small bevel. This side is more normal, but the bevel is just as small. So I don't know. 90-10 used in this catalog to describe this, whereas I could understand it being used to describe this single bevel knife. Now here's the dilemma even further, the side stuff. This is a Deba, single-sided knife. This is a Deba by another known knife maker, and it's a 50-50. A lot of Debas, by the way, are single-sided knives. Okay, so we went 70-30. Here's another example I'm trying to show you. Here's a Honosaki single-sided knife. The outside is all the grind, but it has a slight bevel on the inside where you sharpen it to deburr where all the sharpening is done on the outside. Now that's a single-sided knife, so you think that you figure out how to sharpen it, but if you had to put a ratio on it, I could say 90-10 would be the ratio. Here's another single-sided knife, but this has a bevel on both sides. How would you describe it? That's the dilemma I have with these 70-30s and 60-40s and 90-10s, because the ratio of sharpening that I've learned from John Broida on his videos, or from the forum Murray Carter did a post on the forum, and I questioned him and went back and forth trying to figure out how to apply the theory of the hand sharpening to the fixed dead wicked edge. And I've been writing on this and chasing this asymmetrical side and uneven bevel knives for years, trying to get this answer. And just the other night I came across another dealer, another catalog that described the knife as 80-20. And this is where this comes into question for me. I just bought these two Sushin Inox knives, and both of them are $100 or less knives. They're both uneven ground, uneven asymmetrical knives, uneven bevel knives. Call it what you want. The names overlap. One talks about the grind, the other talks about the bevel. But the grind is what affects the bevel with how you sharpen it. The only way to even out the bevel heights on uneven ground knives is to have a different angle on the bevels. And the sharpening method that's been explained to me is not about angles. It has nothing to do with angles. It has to do with the percent of the effort on one side versus the other, a sharpening ratio, a distribution of effort to achieve the keen edge. But then I came into this problem with how these are described in catalogs. And this knife was described as a 70-30, but this knife is described as an 80-20. And when I looked at these two knives, both Sushin Inox, in different steels, that's another whole story we'll get into possibly here. Well, let me do it real quick. This red one was more expensive, and it's described as a blend, a steel blend of Sandvik and Aus 8. Not a clad knife, but a blend. This is a single they call molybdenum steel, but it's Aus 8 steel. Now this one they call it a 70-30. This one that they call a blend, which I don't know how you blend two stamped steels. It's not pattern welded. It's not plated, not clad. So I don't know what they're talking about. But they call this one 80-20. Like maybe it's harder steel so it can better support a more acute edge than this knife. But here's the dilemma. The sharpening definition is a ratio of effort. How do you describe 70-30 versus 80-20? How do you get that precise in a hand sharpening method? And then some of you with your hand sharpening methods, you start with a back curl on the tip. I've seen a lot of people that do that. And I understand it because I was doing that with my tips when I was using a whetstone. But I'm trying to understand the ratio so I can understand when I'm looking in the catalog, so I can understand what I'm trying to buy, what I'm trying to sharpen, what I'm trying to collect, and what I'm trying to sharpen with Wicked Edge, so I can explain it to other people. This, what I call a sharpening dilemma. Because I've read and I've listened to all these people for so many years, and it doesn't add up. And I don't know if the problem is that there's some latitude with the importers, maybe a little embellishment or, writer's license to make it seem better than it is. But I'm going off of those numbers because I don't see numbers any other place that ever described what was discussed in these forums other than it's a 70-30 uneven. Or, a 90-10, like I said, that one I could see. But when you start with a 60-40 in a hand, that's so close to a 50-50 bevel. It's not a fixed sharpener, angle sharpener. Even the single-sided sharpeners that you flip, like the Edge Pro and the KME and those that you're doing one at a time, you could set them separately, but you have the same problem that I have. We're trying to figure out how to sharpen one side and the other side in that ratio, and is it a description of the bevel height? Is it a description? I've never found anywhere that describes what all this is from a knife sharpener's point of view. And especially from this knife sharpener's point of view, sharpening on wicked edge. And as I'm looking for this is the whole reason that I bought all these these are 70-30 knives by Kagayaki. And these are his smaller knives, the smaller, I have a smaller Kagayaki over here. That's a 70-30. And then I bought these Sushins. One was described as 70-30, one was 80-20, which didn't, how do you get them that close in a hand sharpener? And then I have these by Kanafusa Fujiwara that are 70-30s. The Kagayaki and the Kanafusa are more typical, traditional, older companies that seem to be marketed with traditional definitions, whereas the Sushins seems to be a more hip, cooler company that maybe uses a little different thought process in their descriptions, or maybe some latitude. But the whole point is that we're shopping these, trying to buy that knife, and then when we get it, we got to figure out how to sharpen it. And trying to apply that ratio to wicked edge, because then we want to count. And with wicked edge, we look at the bevel height and we see that it's different. Then we want to figure out, this man did, I thought the ratio at the start was a ratio of the angle, and that it was describing a knife that was an uneven angle or an uneven angle, not that it was a ratio of the effort that you sharpened this. And then I learned that I had purchased, and intentionally I purchased uneven bevel knives, but a lot of them I never gave a lot of thought to them until I started to do this Facebook group, and I wanted to understand what I was doing, and I was looking at some more knives, and I came across the 80-20 thing that made me stop and look. And then I came across the 60-40, and I got into a conversation with a guy on the Knife Sharpening Enthusiast on the same subject. And I've been trying to debunk it or understand it. And what I came up with is there's a lot of latitude there, and it doesn't add up, and it doesn't make sense. And when I try to look into it, and then the guy on the Knife Sharp Enthusiast group said, yeah, he has a 60-40 over here, and they got an 80-20 over there. And I said, no way, they don't exist. It's 70-30 is to talk about that style knife, and a single-sided is another. And I could explain the 90-10 to be the single-sided, but those things don't exist. And he said, yeah, and I went to look at these catalogs, and yes, they had them. But when I looked into it, it was a 50-50 knife that they put a micro bevel on it. So one site called it a 55-45, and another site called this 50-50 ground knife with the micro bevel, and they micro beveled it to make it a right hand, or micro beveled it opposite for the left hand. So it was described as a 45-55 or a 55-45, depending upon whether it was a right hand or a left hand. But the other site called it a 60-40, which is when, and then these same sites called the similar knife like this, that they call a 70-30 grind, as an 80-20, to maybe show that it's better steel, that it can stand up to that. Or maybe they believe that and they're grinding it. But the point that I'm making is that these things don't add up when I clamp them, because I just got these both knives from the same place, and I treat them all the same, and I clamp them all up and look at them under magnification, and it didn't match the ratio, and this is going to run out, so I got to stop here.